She walked down the aisle in a dress that didn't belong to her, toward a man who didn't want her, in a town that had already decided who she was. No flowers, no music worth remembering, just the sound of boots scraping against wooden floorboards and the weight of two people who had run out of choices. The banker sat in the front pew with a smile that never reached his eyes. Outside, Colorado burned under a merciless August sun, and somewhere in that little church, between the silence and the broken vows, a war was just beginning, one that would cost them everything before it gave them anything worth keeping. If this story already has you hooked, stay until the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1881 came to Silver Creek, Colorado, the way bad news always does, quietly at first, then all at once. It had not rained in 63 days. Cole Mercer stood at the bedroom window of his ranch house at 4 in the morning, the same way he had stood there every morning for the past 2 months, staring out at land that used to mean something. The cattle pastures had turned the color of old bone. The creek that gave the town its name had shrunk to a thin, muddy trickle running between cracked banks. 3 of his best bulls had died in the last week alone. Their bodies too expensive to replace and too heavy to move quickly in the heat. He had 17 ranch hands depending on him for wages. A 6-year-old daughter sleeping down the hall who still cried for her mother some nights and pretended not to cry other nights, which was somehow worse. And a meeting with Gerald Holt at 9 o'clock that morning that he had been dreading since the letter arrived 4 days ago. Cole was 34 years old. He had the kind of face that had been weathered rather than aged. Jaw too sharp, eyes too tired, a scar running along his left cheekbone from a fence wire accident when he was 19. His hands were the hands of a man who had never stopped working long enough to let them soften. He had built the Double M Ranch with his father across 15 years of frost and drought and market crashes, and then he had kept building it after his father died. And then he had kept building it after his wife died because the ranch was the only thing left that could not be taken from him by grief. Or so he had believed. He got dressed in the dark without lighting the lamp. Wool shirt, worn leather vest. He buckled his gun belt out of habit rather than intention and stood in the hallway for a moment outside Lily's door, listening. Silence. He pushed the door open an inch. She was asleep on her stomach, one arm hanging off the mattress, her dark hair spread across the pillow in a tangled mess. She looked exactly like her mother when she slept. She always had. Cole stood there longer than he meant to. Then he pulled the door shut, walked through the kitchen without eating, and rode into town as the sun was barely beginning to consider rising. Gerald Holt's bank sat at the center of Silver Creek like a bad tooth in a good mouth, too prominent to ignore, too embedded to remove without causing serious damage. It was the only 2-story brick building on Main Street, which Holt had constructed specifically to make everything around it look smaller. The sign above the door read Silver Creek Savings and Loan in gold letters that were polished every Thursday morning by a young man Holt paid specifically to polish them. Cole tied his horse at the post outside and sat in the saddle for a moment longer than necessary. He had been here before, twice in the last year, to negotiate extensions on his loan payments after the drought began eating into his profits. Both times, Holt had been pleasant in the way that expensive predators are pleasant. Patient, generous with his time, willing to extend the sort of courtesies that made you feel temporarily safe. The office smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon oil. Gerald Holt was already seated behind his desk when Cole entered, which meant he had seen Cole ride up and chosen not to stand. He was 51, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, with the cultivated appearance of a man who wanted to be mistaken for dignified. He wore a suit that cost more than most families in Silver Creek earned in a month. His smile when Cole sat down across from him was the kind that showed all his teeth. "Cole," he said, spreading his hands on the desk, like a man who owned the table, the room, and the ground beneath both. "I appreciate you coming in early. I know ranch mornings aren't simple. You said it was urgent." Cole did not remove his hat. Holt opened a leather folder on the desk and slid it across. "I'll be direct with you, because I respect you. The Double M is carrying a debt of $12,000 against this bank. The last 2 payments were delayed. I was flexible. I think you'd agree I was more than fair about that. I'd agree you were paid in full both times. 30 days late. Paid in full." Holt smiled again, unhurried. "The upcoming payment is due in 6 weeks, based on your cattle losses this summer. And I have been made aware of them, Cole. This is a small town. You will not be able to meet that figure, not from your current revenue." He paused. "I've had 3 independent assessors look at your situation. They all came to the same conclusion." Cole's jaw tightened. "Then I'll find the money another way." "You won't." Holt said it gently, which was worse than if he had said it with cruelty. "I've already spoken to the only other creditor in the territory who might have considered it, and they've declined." He let that sit for a moment before continuing. "However, I do have a proposal." "I'm listening." Holt leaned back in his chair and laced his fingers together across his stomach. "You know Evelyn Hart." The name landed in the middle of the room like something dropped from a height. Cole said nothing. "She arrived in Silver Creek 8 months ago from Boston," Holt continued pleasantly. "School teacher, educated, well-mannered from what I understand. She's been boarding at the Gentry Widow's house on Elm Street, teaching the children at the schoolhouse on Deacon Road." He paused. "She is 28 years old and unmarried. In this town, that's become something of a topic of conversation." "I know who she is," Cole said slowly. "What does she have to do with my debt? Her father passed away last year in Boston, left behind considerable debts of his own, and several creditors who have been quite aggressive in pursuing repayment through his remaining family." Holt tilted his head slightly. "As it happens, I have a personal interest in several of those debts. Miss Hart is not in a position to repay them. She is, however, in a position to resolve them through other means." The silence that followed was long enough for Cole to understand exactly where this was going and hate every step of the path. "You're talking about marriage," Cole said. "I'm talking about a practical arrangement that benefits everyone involved." Holt spread his hands again. "You marry Evelyn Hart. Your debt is restructured. 18 months, manageable installments, interest reduced to 3%. Miss Hart's inherited debt is cleared entirely. She gains the respectability of a married name in a town that has not been kind to her. And your daughter gains a woman's presence in the household, which I think we can both agree she needs." Cole stood up from the chair so fast it scraped back against the floor. "You son of a—" "Careful, Cole." Holt's voice did not change. $12,000 is a great deal of money. Foreclosure proceedings would begin within 30 days of a missed payment. I've already drawn up the papers. Your ranch, your livestock, your equipment, all of it becomes collateral. You'd walk away with nothing. Lily would walk away with nothing." He let that word sit. Lily. Or you could walk into that church on Saturday morning and say 2 words in front of a preacher. Cole stood with both hands braced on the desk, breathing hard through his nose, staring at the man across from him. There was a long moment where the only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock on Holt's wall and the distant sound of a wagon moving along Main Street outside. "Does she know?" Cole finally said. "Miss Hart. I had a conversation with her yesterday afternoon," Holt said smoothly. She was initially resistant. After some further discussion about her circumstances, she came to understand the situation, which meant he had threatened her too. Cole straightened up slowly. He felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with his stomach, a deep, grinding kind of sick that started somewhere behind his sternum. He thought about the ranch. He thought about his father's hands hammering fence posts into frozen ground. He thought about Lily, sleeping with her arm hanging off the mattress. "Saturday," he said. It was not a question. It was 10 o'clock, Holt confirmed, already reaching for his pen. "I'll have the restructured loan documents ready by Friday evening." Cole walked out of the bank without another word and stood on the wooden sidewalk in the morning heat for a long time, his hat in his hands, staring at nothing in particular. He had been blackmailed before. He had been cheated before. He had survived drought and debt and death and 10 kinds of hard luck that would have broken other men. He had never before been sold. He had seen Evelyn Hart exactly 4 times since she arrived in Silver Creek. The first time, he had been picking up feed supplies at Crandall's General Store, and she had been at the counter asking about mail that hadn't arrived yet. She was tall for a woman, not unusually so, but enough that she stood straight rather than trying to appear smaller. Dark hair pinned back in a way that suggested function rather than decoration. She wore a pale blue dress that was clean but visibly mended at the collar. When she turned and saw Cole looking at her, she had given him the kind of composed, direct gaze that most women in Silver Creek did not give to strange men. Not defiant, not flirtatious, just steady, like she had already decided to take up as much space as she was entitled to and wasn't interested in apologizing for it. He had looked away first. He still wasn't sure why that bothered him. The second time was at the schoolhouse Christmas pageant in December, which he had attended for Lily's sake. Evelyn had organized the whole event, made the costumes, written the narration, coached the children through their lines. When a 7-year-old boy froze completely in the middle of his recitation, she had stepped up beside him without drama, whispered something in his ear, and the boy had laughed once and then continued. Nobody in the audience seemed to notice except Cole, who noticed everything. The third time was at the general store again, 2 months later. He overheard 2 women on the front porch, the Dawson wife and one of her friends, discussing how peculiar it was that Miss Hart still wasn't married. At her age, one of them said, "She must have something wrong with her that we can't see." The other one laughed. When he came around the corner with his supply list, Evelyn was standing 3 feet away, perfectly still, with a jar of preserves in her hand and an expression on her face that told him she had heard every word. She set the jar back on the shelf, adjusted the collar of her dress, and walked out of the store without buying anything. He had thought about that moment more often than made sense. The fourth time was last week, just days before Holt's letter arrived. He had passed her on the road between town and the schoolhouse, driving a borrowed wagon loaded with books. She had one wheel in a rut and was trying to work it free. He'd stopped and helped without being asked and without much conversation. She thanked him with the same steady composure she seemed to apply to everything. He rode off thinking that she reminded him of wire cable, the kind that looks thin until you put weight on it, and then you realize it was holding up far more than anyone understood. None of that made Saturday easier. The Reverend Matthias Bloom conducted the ceremony with the speed and enthusiasm of a man reading through a legal document he had not written and did not endorse. The church was about a third full. Word had traveled fast in Silver Creek. It always did. And most of the congregation was there less out of goodwill and more out of the particular human appetite for watching people in difficult situations. Cole stood at the front in his good shirt, the blue one he had worn to his first wedding and had not worn since, with his hands clasped in front of him and his face set in an expression he had worked on during the ride into town. Not angry, not broken, just still. He had learned over the years that stillness was its own kind of armor. He heard the door at the back of the church open. He heard the soft sound of footsteps on the wooden floor. He did not turn around. In the pew to his left, Lily sat with her hands folded in her lap and her jaw set in a way that looked uncomfortably like him. She was wearing her good dress, the yellow one, and her dark hair had been braided by Mrs. Walsh from the neighboring ranch, who had offered to help and whom Cole had allowed in that morning with a complicated mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Lily had not spoken much since he told her. She had asked 2 questions. Does this mean someone else is going to live at our house? And then, after a long pause, does this mean you're going to forget Mama? He had answered both questions as honestly as he could manage. He was still not sure he'd said the right things. Evelyn reached the front of the church and stopped beside him. He looked at her then. He felt it would be worse somehow to refuse to look. She was wearing a dark green dress. Not a wedding dress, just a good dress, the best she owned from the look of it. Her hair was done more carefully than usual. Her hands were clasped in front of her, and they were absolutely still, which he understood was costing her something because nothing this hard is ever as calm as it looks on the outside. She turned her head and looked at him with those level, dark eyes. There was no warmth in the look, but there was no hatred either. It was the look of a person taking inventory of a situation they had not chosen and intended to survive regardless. He respected that, grudgingly. Reverend Bloom opened his Bible. From the third row, Gerald Holt watched with his hands folded over his belly and a small, satisfied expression on his face that Cole filed away in the part of his mind reserved for accounts he intended to settle eventually. "Dearly beloved," Bloom began. The words moved through the ceremony like water through a dry creek, present technically, but unconvincing. Cole said what he was supposed to say when he was supposed to say it. So did Evelyn. Her voice was clear and even, no trembling. When the Reverend asked if anyone present had cause to object, someone in the back coughed, and a couple of people near the middle shifted in their pews, and Cole thought he heard the Dawson woman whisper something to her husband. Nobody spoke. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Cole looked at Evelyn again. She was already looking at him. Neither of them smiled. The ride back to the ranch was nearly silent. Lily sat between them in the wagon seat, which had not been Cole's choice but had become the arrangement when Lily climbed up first and positioned herself squarely in the middle, clearly and deliberately. Evelyn sat on Lily's other side with her one bag of belongings loaded in the wagon bed behind them, one small trunk, a worn leather satchel, and a wooden box that she had kept close to her throughout the morning and set carefully in the wagon herself rather than letting anyone else handle it. After about 20 minutes of nobody saying anything, Lily said, without turning her head, "My mother's name was Clara." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know. I've heard people speak of her. They say she was a good woman." "She was the best woman." Lily said it flatly, not as an argument, just as a fact that required acknowledgement. "I believe you," Evelyn said. Lily said nothing else for the rest of the ride, but she did not lean away from Evelyn the way she had been leaning away since they left the church. It was a small shift, barely perceptible, but Cole noticed it because he had been noticing everything about his daughter for 2 years, with the attentiveness of a man who was terrified of failing her. The Double M came into view as they rounded the last bend. The main house, the barn, the bunkhouse beyond it, the corrals that were quieter than they used to be. Cole had always felt something settle in him when he saw the ranch at the end of a hard ride, the way a long exhale settles something in the chest. Today, it just looked like a place he owed money on. He pulled the wagon up to the front of the house. His ranch foreman, a quiet Texan named Jasper Webb, was waiting near the porch with his hat in his hands and a look on his face that communicated a complex mixture of loyalty, concern, and the particular discomfort of a man who does not know what to do with his hands. "Mrs. Mercer," Jasper said, with a nod toward Evelyn. "That's awesome." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon without waiting for Cole to help her. "Mr. Webb," she said, "I understand you've been running this ranch through a difficult season. I look forward to being useful rather than a burden." Jasper blinked once. "Yes, ma'am." Cole climbed down and lifted Lily off the seat. She accepted being carried as far as the porch steps and then wriggled down and went inside without looking at anyone. The screen door banged shut behind her. The house had not had a woman living in it for 22 months. Cole had kept it reasonably clean because he was not a man who left messes and because Lily deserved better than chaos. But the absence of a certain kind of attention was visible if you knew what to look for. The kitchen curtains were gray from smoke and should have been washed months ago. The windowsill above the sink had accumulated a thin line of grime that could only be cleared by someone who thought to look at it straight on. There were dishes stacked properly, but without the kind of arrangement that made them useful rather than just stored. Evelyn stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment, taking it in. Then she set her satchel on the kitchen table, removed her good jacket and hung it carefully on the peg by the door, and began looking through the supply cabinet with the systematic efficiency of a woman taking inventory. Cole stood in the middle of the kitchen watching her. "I can show you where things are. I can find them," she said, without looking up from the cabinet. He stood there another few seconds, then he said, "I'll take your trunk to the back bedroom." She stopped and turned around. Her expression was careful and precise. "I'd like to understand what you expect," she said, "from this arrangement." Cole was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said." She kept her voice level. "I'm not going to pretend this is something it isn't, Mr. Mercer. You didn't choose me. I didn't choose you. We were both put in an impossible situation by a man who enjoys impossible situations. So I'd rather we agree, clearly and plainly, on what this household is going to look like before we both walk around for a month making assumptions and running into each other." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're direct. I found that being indirect wastes time and causes more damage in the end." Cole pulled out a kitchen chair and sat down. He was tired in a way that went past the bones and into something underneath. He set his hat on the table. "Fine. You take the back bedroom. I stay in the front. You run the house the way you see fit. I run the ranch. We don't get in each other's way. Whatever we told the preacher this morning," he paused, "that stays in the church." Evelyn nodded once. "Agreed." She paused. "And Lily?" His jaw tightened slightly. "What about her?" "She's grieving," Evelyn said quietly. "Not misbehaving, not being difficult. She's grieving, and she doesn't have anyone who knows what to do with that. I won't try to replace her mother. I won't pretend we're going to be something we're not. But I also won't ignore a child who is hurting because it makes everyone else more comfortable." She held his gaze. "That's not negotiable." Cole was quiet for several seconds. Outside, he could hear Jasper talking to one of the ranch hands in the yard, the sound of a horse moving in the corral. The house ticked quietly around them, the way old houses do. "Agreed," he said finally. He picked up his hat and stood up. He was almost at the door to the hallway when she spoke again. "Mr. Mercer." He stopped, didn't turn around fully. "I don't intend to be a problem," she said. "I'm aware of the debt situation. I'm aware that this ranch is under significant pressure. If there are ways I can help beyond managing the household, I'd like to know about them." He turned that over for a moment. "You're a school teacher," he said. "I'm a school teacher who grew up reading contract law over her father's shoulder for 15 years, she said, among other things. He didn't know what to do with that, so he said nothing and kept walking. That first week was like sharing a house with weather. You were always aware of it. You adjusted around it. But you didn't pretend you controlled it, and you didn't try to have a conversation with it. Cole was up before dawn every day, out the door before Evelyn was in the kitchen. He came in for meals when they were ready, ate without much conversation, and went back out. He was not rude. He was not warm. He was the way a man is when he has decided to get through something by sheer forward motion, not looking left or right, not slowing down long enough for anything to catch up to him. Evelyn established a routine with a quietness and efficiency that he found, against his will, difficult to criticize. The kitchen curtains were washed and rehung by the third day. Meals were plain but consistent and hot, not elaborate, not trying to impress anyone, just functional and reliable, which was what the household actually needed. She found the supply ledger that one of the ranch hands had been keeping sloppily and reorganized it without being asked, which he discovered when he sat down to review it one evening and realized it was suddenly comprehensible. He didn't say anything about it. Neither did she. With Lily, it was harder. Lily was smart and observant and had inherited what Clara used to call Cole's stubbornness that wears good manners as a costume. She did not yell at Evelyn again after that first morning, but she had developed a particular talent for being present in a room in a way that communicated absence, answering in single syllables when addressed, sitting at the table with her eyes on her plate, finding reasons to be somewhere else when Evelyn was trying to do something. On the fifth evening, Cole came in from the barn to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table alone, crying quietly into her arms. Evelyn was on the porch. He could hear the slow creak of the rocking chair. He sat down beside Lily and put a hand on her back. "What is it, Bug?" Lily lifted her face. It was red and wet, and she looked very small and very angry at the same time. "I found Mama's apron," she said. "The yellow one with the flowers. It was in the bottom of the cedar chest, and I found it, and I put it on, and I came to show you, and she..." She pointed toward the porch. "She was the one who was here, and not you, and I didn't want her. I wanted you." Cole pulled her against his chest and held on. "I know," he said. "I know." "Why does she have to be here?" Lily said into his shirt. Muffled, miserable. "Because I needed help keeping the ranch," he said. He had decided a long time ago that he would rather tell his daughter hard true things than easy false ones, and she needed somewhere safe to be. "That's all it is right now, Lily. That's what it is." Lily was quiet for a moment, then still muffled. "Is she mean?" Cole thought about it. "No," he said honestly. "Is she going to take my room?" "No." "Is she going to throw away Mama's things?" "Absolutely not." Another pause. "She makes the biscuits with too much salt." "I know. You can tell her." "You could tell her," Cole said. Lily went very still against him. Then she pulled back and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "Maybe," she said, in the tone of a 6-year-old who is not ready to commit to anything. It was the 9th day when everything that had been quiet went loud. Cole was in the near pasture working with a young stallion he had been training for 3 weeks, a dark bay named Ridgeline, with good bones and a temperament that oscillated between brilliant and murderous depending on the day. He had the horse on a long lead, working him through direction changes, when something, a crow lifting suddenly from the fence line, a shift in the wind, something, set the animal off completely. The stallion wheeled hard to the left, and the lead rope snapped through Cole's gloves like a burning wire. He had half a second to realize what was happening before the horse came back around and the full weight of it caught him on the left side, shoulder, hip, and then the ground was coming up very fast, and then it was just the ground. He heard shouting from somewhere. He was aware of rolling. He got his arms up by instinct, took most of the second impact on his forearms, and then he was still, and the horse was no longer on top of him. For a moment, he just lay there in the dirt and took inventory of himself the way you do after a fall, going through the body from the outside in, checking what moved, what didn't, what hurt in a simple way and what hurt in the wrong way. Left shoulder, that was going to be a problem. He got himself to sitting, slowly, and was immediately aware of blood. His shirt was torn along the left arm, and the forearm underneath was open in a jagged line from the fence wire that had caught him on the way down. One of the ranch hands, young Danny Pruitt, was already running toward him from the barn. "Mr. Mercer." "I'm up," Cole said. "You're bleeding something serious." "I said I'm up, Danny." He got to his feet, which took more effort than he intended to show. The shoulder screamed. He had dislocated it before, and he knew the particular quality of that pain. He also knew that this time it was not dislocated, but something else was wrong with it. Something deeper. He made it back to the house under his own power, which was more about pride than practicality. He was halfway through the back door when Evelyn appeared in the kitchen doorway, took one look at him, and said, "Sit down," in a voice that was not a suggestion. "I'm fine." "You're absolutely not fine. Sit down, Mr. Mercer." "I've had worse." "I'm certain you have." She was already moving, already pulling things from places in the kitchen he didn't know she'd found. "That's not relevant. Sit down." He sat down. She brought a basin of water, clean cloth, and a tin box he recognized vaguely as one of the items from her wooden satchel. She set them on the table, pulled a chair around close to his, and started cutting the torn sleeve away from the wound with a pair of small scissors that moved with a precision that struck him through the haze of pain as unusually professional. "You've done this before," he said. "My father was a doctor." Her voice was matter-of-fact. She was cleaning the wound now, and it was not gentle, but it was efficient. She was fast and accurate in a way that minimized the bad moments rather than prolonging them. "I helped in his practice from the time I was 12 until he became ill." "In Boston." "In Boston." She reached into the tin box and produced a needle and thread that she was already beginning to thread. "This will require stitches. You'll want to look at something else." "I don't need to look somewhere else." She glanced up at him briefly. "Suit yourself." He watched her hands as she worked, the steadiness of them, the focus. Outside the window, he could hear Danny putting Ridgeline back in the corral, his voice low and calm, the way Cole had taught him to speak around horses. The afternoon light was coming in long and yellow through the kitchen window, and it fell across the table between them in a way that was, despite everything, ordinary. The kind of light that has nothing to do with bankers or debts or forced arrangements, the kind that just exists regardless of what the people underneath it are going through. He did not make a sound during the stitching. When she tied it off and reached for the bandaging cloth, she paused and looked at his shoulder. "This shoulder has been damaged. More than today." "I know. The muscles here are—" She touched it briefly, carefully, with 2 fingers, and even that light contact made him lock his jaw. "There's an old injury that didn't heal properly. If you keep working on it without support, it's going to get considerably worse." "I'll manage." "You keep saying that." She began wrapping the bandage. Her hands were close. The kitchen was quiet. "Does managing things alone ever stop being your first and only plan?" He looked at her. "It's kept me going." She tied off the bandage and sat back slightly, regarding him with those steady, dark eyes. "It's also left your shoulder half destroyed and put you on the floor of a pasture this afternoon," she said. "I'm not criticizing, I'm observing." There was a silence that was different from the silences they'd been having all week. Those silences had been empty. This one had something in it. From down the hallway, they heard Lily's small feet on the floor. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her stocking feet, looked at Cole's bandaged arm, looked at Evelyn, and looked at Cole again. "Did the horse get you?" she demanded. "Little bit." Lily crossed the kitchen, examined the bandage with the critical air of someone who had not been consulted on a decision and had opinions about it. Then she looked at Evelyn. "Did you fix it?" "I helped," Evelyn said. Lily considered this for a moment, then she turned back to Cole. "Your biscuits are worse than hers anyway," she said. "You should just let her make them." Cole blinked. "Your biscuits are like rocks," Lily clarified, and went back down the hall. Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn was very carefully not smiling, but the effort was visible, And that, more than anything that had happened in the past 9 days, made her suddenly real to him in a way she hadn't been before. Not a figure, not a complication, a person. "The salt," he said, "in the biscuits. She thinks there's too much." "She's right," Evelyn said. "I overcorrected from a previous batch. I'll adjust." Cole stood up from the chair, testing the shoulder carefully. It hurt in a controlled way now, present but manageable. "Thank you," he said. The words came out stiff, but they came out. Evelyn nodded once, already cleaning up the basin and cloth, her back to him. "Try not to get thrown by horses if you can avoid it," she said. "The stitches need 3 days to settle." He almost said something. He wasn't sure what. He left it instead and went out to check on Ridgeline, and the afternoon closed behind him like a page turning. On the 12th day, Gerald Holt came to the ranch. Cole was in the barn when he heard the horse on the road. By the time he came out into the yard, Holt was already climbing down from his buggy with 2 men Cole didn't recognize flanking him, both of them large, both wearing sidearms in a too obvious way that was meant to be noticed. Cole walked out to meet him with his thumbs in his belt. Behind him, he heard the screen door open and shut, but he didn't look back. "Cole." Holt removed his hat with a flourish that was mockery dressed up as manners. "I wanted to come by personally, check on the new household." His eyes moved past Cole's shoulder. Mrs. Mercer. Evelyn was standing on the porch. She had come out quietly and positioned herself in the doorway with both arms loose at her sides. She said nothing. "This is a social call," Holt continued, "but also a reminder call. The first restructured payment is in 5 weeks. I want to make sure we have no misunderstandings about that deadline." He smiled. "Given recent complications, I wanted to confirm that nothing about our arrangement has been reconsidered." "Nothing's been reconsidered," Cole said flatly. "Excellent." Holt's eyes moved to Evelyn again, slowly, in a way that made Cole's jaw tighten. "Miss Hart, or Mrs. Mercer, I should say." His smile was a kind of weapon. "I do hope the adjustment has been smooth." Evelyn walked down the porch steps and across the yard. She stopped beside Cole, and she did not look small doing it. She looked at Holt with her level dark eyes. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I've been reviewing the original loan documents since arriving here." Holt's smile did not change. "Have you?" "I have." Her voice was clear and unhurried. "The late payment penalty clause in Section 4 is not consistent with Colorado territorial lending regulations, which were updated in March of 1879. The clause as written would not be enforceable under current law." She paused. "I also noticed that the interest recalculation in the amended schedule doesn't match the base figures in the original agreement, which is either a significant clerical error or something else entirely." There was a silence. One of Holt's flanking men shifted his weight. Holt was very still. "I mention it," Evelyn continued in the same pleasant, even tone, "because I assume you'd want to know about discrepancies before they became a matter for federal review." Holt looked at her for a long moment. His smile was still in place, but something behind his eyes had gone very flat and cold. "You're quite something," he said softly. "I'm a woman who reads contracts," she said. "Nothing remarkable about that." Holt put his hat back on. 5 weeks, Cole," he said, without looking at Evelyn again. "Not a day's grace." He turned and walked back to his buggy, and his 2 men followed, and the wheels crunched back down the road. Cole stood looking after the buggy until it rounded the bend and disappeared. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Those discrepancies," he said. "Are they real, or were you—" "They're real," she said. "I wasn't certain when I walked out here. I wanted to see his reaction. Now I'm certain." She turned back toward the house. "I'll need the original documents, and I need paper and quiet for about 2 hours this evening." Cole stared at the place where the road bent, and Holt had disappeared. "Evelyn," he said. He had not used her first name before. It came out differently than he expected. Less formal, more accidental, the way things sometimes escape before you've decided to say them. She turned back. "Good," he said. She looked at him a moment, then she nodded once and went inside. The evening wind came in from the mountains and moved through the dry grass and moved on. Somewhere in the corral, Ridgeline moved and settled. The screen door on the bunkhouse opened and shut as 2 of the hands came back from dinner. Cole stood in the yard until the last of Holt's dust had cleared from the air. For the first time since that morning in the bank, since before that morning, if he was honest, which he was trying to be, he felt something shift. Nothing large, nothing you could point to and name, just a small, stubborn sense that they were no longer simply losing. He went inside to find out what was in those documents. The documents were worse than Evelyn had initially indicated. She spent the first hour at the kitchen table with the oil lamp pulled close, going through every page of the original loan agreement and the 2 amended schedules that had been added since. Cole sat across from her with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, watching her work. She had a way of reading that was almost physical. Her finger moved along lines, stopped, backed up, moved again. Occasionally she made a small mark in the margin with a pencil stub she kept behind her ear. She did not explain what she was marking, and he did not ask, because he could tell from the quality of her silence that interrupting it would be costly. Lily had gone to bed an hour ago. The ranch house was quiet except for the lamp hiss and the occasional pop of the wood settling in the walls as the night cooled. After the second hour, Evelyn set down her pencil and sat back. "Tell me," Cole said. "The interest recalculation isn't a clerical error," she said. "It's deliberate. He restructured the compounding schedule in the amendment so that each late payment, even a single day late, triggers a recalculation of the entire principal at a higher rate, not just a standard late fee. Under Colorado territorial law, that clause is unenforceable as written. But," she paused, pressing 2 fingers against her temple, "if you'd signed the amendment without catching it, and then defaulted, he could have argued it in a sympathetic court and possibly made it stick long enough to foreclose before you could challenge it." Cole was quiet for a moment. "He's done this before." "Almost certainly." She tapped the stack of pages. "The language is too specific. This isn't someone who made a mistake and got lucky. This is someone who has refined a particular method." She looked up. "How many ranchers in the territory have borrowed from him in the last 5 years?" "At least a dozen that I know of, probably more." "And how many still have their land?" Cole looked at the table. The answer was not a comfortable number. Evelyn nodded, like he'd said it aloud. "We need the other loan documents, from the other families. If the same clause appears in multiple agreements, that's a pattern. A federal prosecutor can work with a pattern." She paused. "Do you know any of the families personally?" "Most of them." "Would they talk to you?" Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Some. The ones who lost everything. They're either gone or too broken to want to revisit it. But there are 2 or 3 still fighting him, still trying to make payments. Those families might talk." "That's where we start," Evelyn said. He looked at her across the table. The lamp made deep shadows under her cheekbones, and she looked tired. Genuinely, bone-deep tired, in a way she had not let show during the day. He realized, with a small, uncomfortable clarity, that she was carrying something he hadn't thought to ask about. She had arrived at his door 10 days ago with 1 trunk and a satchel and whatever life had done to her before Silver Creek, and he had been so concentrated on his own disaster that the shape of hers had barely registered. "The debts Holt held over you," Cole said. "Your father's." Evelyn's expression shifted. "Not much, just a slight tightening around the eyes." "What about them?" "Were they real? The debts?" She was quiet for a moment. "My father was a good doctor and a poor businessman," she said finally. "He trusted the wrong people with the practice's finances. When he got sick and could no longer work, the debts surfaced. Some of them were legitimate. Some of them," she paused, "were of the same variety as what we just spent 2 hours looking at." She straightened the pages into a neat stack and set them aside. "Holt acquired the notes sometime in the last year. I don't know how. I found out about it 3 days before he called me into his office." So he had been planning this. "He had been building it," she said. "There's a difference. Planning implies he knew exactly what he wanted from the start. Building means he collects pieces until they fit together into something useful." She met his eyes. "We were both pieces, Mr. Mercer. He just needed to find the right moment to fit us together." Cole stood up from the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark yard, the outline of the barn against the night sky, the scatter of stars above the mountain ridge. He had spent the last 2 months feeling like a man being slowly buried, each day a little more weight, a little less air. What Evelyn was describing was something different, not a disaster that happened to him, a trap that had been built around him, that made him angry in a way that was actually useful. "Get some sleep," he said without turning from the window. "I want to ride out to the Calloway place tomorrow. Tom Calloway has been 3 months behind on his payments, and he's stubborn enough that he hasn't left yet." He paused. "He'll talk to me." He heard the sound of her chair pushing back, her footsteps crossing the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Mercer?" He turned. "The shoulder," she said. "Ice from the creek before you sleep. 20 minutes. It'll help the swelling." He almost said he was fine. He said, "I know." Instead, which was not quite true, but was closer to cooperative than his default setting. She went down the hall. He stood at the window a while longer, and then he went to get ice from the creek, and the night moved on without ceremony. The Calloway place was 6 miles north, up a rutted track that wound through scrub oak and red rock before opening onto a small valley that had once been decent grazing land and now looked like it was losing an argument with the drought. Tom Calloway was 53, built like a fence post, and had been a friend of Cole's father before Cole was old enough to have opinions about anything. He was standing in his yard splitting firewood when Cole rode up, and he kept splitting it for a good 10 seconds after Cole arrived, before stopping to acknowledge him. "Heard you got married," Tom said. "Word travels." "It's a small county." Tom set down his axe and pulled a rag from his back pocket. He looked at Cole, then at Evelyn, who had ridden out beside him. Tom's expression did the particular arithmetic that older men do when they're assessing a situation and trying not to show it. "Ma'am?" "Mr. Calloway?" Evelyn said. They sat on the porch with watered-down coffee that Tom apologized for without explaining, and Cole laid it out plainly. What they'd found in the documents, what Evelyn thought it meant, what they were trying to build. Tom listened without interrupting, which was how he always listened, and when Cole finished, he sat for a moment looking out at his yard. "Martha wanted to leave," Tom said finally. "After the Second Amendment. She said something was wrong, and she couldn't put her finger on it, but she knew." He set down his cup. "I told her she was worrying over nothing." "The clause is in your agreement too?" Evelyn asked. "I'd have to get the papers." He stood up and went inside. They heard him moving around, drawers opening and closing. When he came back, he had a battered folder that he handed to Evelyn, who opened it immediately. She found it in under a minute. She showed Cole without a word, just turned the page and pointed. He looked at Tom. "Same language," Cole said, word for word. Tom sat back down heavily. "Son of a bitch," he said quietly. Not with anger exactly, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has been right about the wrong thing. Martha knew. "We need your written statement," Evelyn said. She had pulled out a sheet of paper from her own satchel. She had packed it specifically, which Cole had noticed without commenting on. "Not for Holt, for federal authorities. We're collecting testimony from every family he's done this to. Yours matters." Tom looked at the paper and then at Cole. "You think this is going somewhere?" "I think it goes somewhere if we do it right," Cole said. "I think we have a better chance than we did last week." Tom was quiet for a moment. Then he picked up the pen Evelyn had set on the arm of his chair. "Tell me what to write," he said. They stayed 2 hours. They rode back to the Double M in the late afternoon, the sun going sideways and orange through the dust, and neither of them spoke much because there wasn't much to say that the silence didn't already contain. The trip had gone as well as it could have. That felt, under the current circumstances, like a dangerous thing to trust. Whatever fragile, functional silence had been holding the ranch house together broke at the end of the 3rd week, not with anything dramatic, but the way things often break, through accumulation. Lily had been watching Evelyn the way a cat watches something moving across a floor. Continuous, careful, unwilling to commit. Then one Tuesday afternoon, Cole came in from the north pasture to find Lily and Evelyn in the small patch of ground behind the kitchen, crouched together in the dirt. He stopped on the back porch without going in. Evelyn was showing Lily something. A plant growing near the edge of the fence, low to the ground, with small clusters of pale flowers. "This one," Evelyn said. "You see how the leaves feel?" Lily touched them, cautious. "Fuzzy. That's how you know it. And the smell." Evelyn broke a small stem and held it out. Lily leaned in and sniffed it, then made a face. "Not nice," she concluded. "No, but useful." If you bruise the leaves and steep them, you get something that helps with inflammation. It's what I used on your father's shoulder. Lily looked from the plant to the house, thinking, will it work on my knee? I scraped it yesterday. Different thing, Evelyn said, but there's something else. She moved a few feet along the fence line, crouching again. This one. Lily followed, close now, her earlier distance entirely gone in the way children's distances sometimes vanish without announcement. Cole stood on the porch and did not announce himself. He watched his daughter sit in the dirt beside a woman she had screamed at 3 weeks ago, examining plants with the focused intensity she usually reserved for things she had decided were worth her time. He did not know what to do with the feeling that produced in his chest. It was not a simple feeling. It had several things mixed into it. Relief, certainly, and something that might have been gratitude, but also a particular grief he hadn't expected, because watching Lily lean toward someone new was a reminder that life kept moving regardless of what you'd lost and regardless of whether you were ready. He went back inside through the front door and started on the evening supply ledger and didn't say anything about what he'd seen. That night at dinner, Lily ate her biscuits without commenting on the salt. The night they were forced to share a room in Denver was not something either of them had planned. They had ridden the 2-day journey to meet with a territorial lawyer recommended by a rancher contact of Cole's, a man named Aldous Finch, who had a reputation for being both principled and expensive, and who had, according to the contact, dealt with Holt's type before. The ride was long and cold, and they spent most of it on business, reviewing documents, going over testimony, preparing what to say. Evelyn had a way of organizing information verbally that Cole found useful against his will. She would lay things out in sequence, identify the weak points in their argument before he could, and propose solutions without framing them as suggestions, which saved time. They argued twice during the journey. The first time was about strategy. Cole wanted to approach Finch with everything at once. Evelyn wanted to lead with the strongest piece and hold the others in reserve. She was right, and he knew it by the time the argument ended, though arriving at that conclusion was not a graceful process. The second time was about a shortcut through a canyon route Cole knew that Evelyn felt was unnecessarily risky given the clouds building in the northwest. She was also right about that. The clouds became a blizzard before they reached the Denver outskirts, the kind that comes in fast off the mountains and turns the world into a horizontal wall of white. The hotel they reached was full except for one room. The proprietor, a round-faced woman with no patience for complicated situations, informed them of this with the air of someone who did not make the weather and was not going to apologize for it. "One room," Cole said. "One room," the woman confirmed. "There's a good fire in it." He looked at Evelyn. She looked at the window where the snow was coming down sideways. She said, "I'll take the chair." "You're not taking the chair. I'm not having this discussion in a hotel lobby." They had it in the hallway instead, which was only marginally better. Cole ended up on the floor with his bedroll, and Evelyn had the bed, which was the only arrangement either of them could agree on, and even that took longer to reach than it should have. The room was small, and the fire was good, and the blizzard was loud. After an hour of silence in which both of them pretended to be asleep, Evelyn said, from the direction of the bed, "Are you awake?" "Yes," Cole said. A pause. "How long were you married?" "Before." He stared at the ceiling. 9 years. "She was from Colorado?" "Wyoming, originally. She came here with her family when she was 16. He paused. "We met at a livestock auction, which she always said was not a romantic origin story." I disagreed. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "How did she die?" "Fever. Summer of '79. It went through the county fast." He kept his voice even. "Lily was 4. She doesn't remember much about that summer, but she remembers enough." The fire crackled. Snow hit the window in gusts. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said, and it was not the kind of sorry people say to fill silence. It had weight to it. He looked at the dark ceiling. "What happened in Boston?" he said. "The cousin. Holt mentioned family when he was—" He paused, choosing the word, "negotiating." The silence from Evelyn's direction changed quality. "His name is William Hart," she said finally. "My father's nephew. After my father became ill and the debts appeared, William offered to resolve everything. In exchange for—" She stopped. Cole waited. "He was not offering marriage," she said flatly. The fire popped. Cole felt something move through him that was straightforward anger, clean and specific. Did he? No, she said. I left Boston before it could reach that point. I took a teaching position in the first territory that would have me. A pause. Silver Creek was not my first choice. It was available. And then Holt found you anyway. People like Holt and William have long arms, she said, or they think they do. Cole was quiet for a moment. Outside, the blizzard pressed against the walls like something alive. You should have told me, he said finally, about the cousin, about what you were running from. You didn't ask. A beat. And I wasn't sure I owed you the information. You didn't owe me anything. He turned his head toward the ceiling. But we're supposed to be fighting the same fight, and I can't fight what I don't know is coming. Another long silence. Then Evelyn said quietly, He'll come eventually. William. When he finds out I married and didn't simply disappear, he'll come. A pause. I should have warned you sooner. That was a mistake. It was the first time he had heard her admit to a mistake directly. It landed differently than he expected. Not like weakness, but like a door opening an inch. We'll deal with it when it comes, he said. He heard her exhale slowly in the dark. You say that like it's simple. I don't think it's simple. I think it's just what comes next. He shifted on the bedroll, his shoulder complaining. Go to sleep, Evelyn. Finch expects us at 8. She didn't answer, but after a few minutes her breathing changed and he knew she had finally let herself rest. He lay awake a while longer, listening to the storm exhaust itself against the walls, and thought about long arms and the particular kind of trouble that follows people who have tried too hard to escape it. He did not think about how easily he'd said her name. He told himself he didn't. Aldous Finch was small, bearded, and consumed roughly 6 cups of coffee between 8 in the morning and noon, which was the duration of their meeting. He read through every document they had brought without speaking, asked 12 questions in rapid succession, listened to Evelyn's analysis of the interest clause with the focused attention of a man who has just found something he was already looking for, and then sat back and said, This is real. We know it's real, Cole said. I mean, it's actionable, Finch said, which is different. He tapped the documents. The clause alone might be arguable in a local court, but the pattern across multiple agreements, if you can produce 3, 4, 5 more instances of identical language, that moves it from local dispute to federal fraud. He looked at Evelyn. Where did you learn contracts? My father. Your father was a lawyer? A doctor who read everything. Finch looked at her for a moment, then back at the documents. I'll need original copies from each family, not transcriptions, not summaries, originals or certified copies if they've misplaced the originals. He pulled a legal pad toward him. Give me the names of every family you know Holt has done business with. Cole and Evelyn spent the next hour going through everything they knew. By the time they left Finch's office, the blizzard had cleared and Denver glittered hard and cold under a sky that had gone the particular bright blue that comes after a storm scrubs everything clean. They stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the office, and neither of them spoke for a moment. He thinks we have something, Evelyn said. He said we have something. Cole pulled his coat tighter. The cold had teeth. He said we have something if we can build it. She turned to look at him. There was something in her face that had not been there before. Not exactly hope, because hope was too light a word for what she'd been through, but something adjacent to it, a kind of forward tilt. That means going back to every family, collecting documents, probably more than we have time for. Then we don't waste the time we have. He started toward where the horses were boarded. You ride well enough for rough ground? She gave him a look that said she found the question mildly insulting. I rode here from Boston in 3 stages across terrain your horse would complain about. He almost smiled. He caught it and kept it to himself. We leave at first light. They rode back across 2 days of cold road, and the journey felt different than the ride out. Not easier exactly, but less like parallel lines running alongside each other. More like something that had started, reluctantly, to converge. Neither of them said so, but both of them knew. They came back from Denver with 6 signed statements, 4 original loan documents, and a letter from Aldous Finch outlining a preliminary legal strategy that he warned them, twice, in writing, was not a guarantee of anything. Cole pinned the letter to the wall above the desk in the ranch office and read it every morning the way some men read scripture, not for comfort, but for orientation. to remember what direction they were supposed to be facing. The next 2 weeks moved the way hard work moves, relentlessly, without applause, demanding more than you had yesterday and not apologizing for it. Cole and Evelyn split the territory between them like a map being divided across a table. He rode north and west to the ranching families. Men who knew him, who had shaken his father's hand, who would open a door for Cole Mercer that they would not open for a stranger. She rode east and south with Danny Pruitt as an escort to the farming settlements and the smaller homesteads, where the families Holt had ruined were quieter and more frightened, and sometimes took the better part of an afternoon to trust her enough to say anything useful. She was better at it than Cole expected. He would not have said so out loud, but he knew it by the quality of what she brought back. Not just documents, but details. The widow Hester Crane, whose husband had died of a stroke 6 months after Holt foreclosed on their wheat farm, had kept every letter Holt had ever sent her. Every one. Tied with twine in a flour tin under her bed. Evelyn had sat with her for 3 hours and come away with copies of 14 letters that established a pattern of deliberate misinformation stretching back to 1877. She had also, Cole noticed when Evelyn returned that evening, given the woman her own good wool shawl, which she did not mention, and which Hester Crane probably needed more than the cold ride back justified. Cole did not comment on the shawl. Evelyn did not explain it. That was increasingly how they operated. A functional economy of words and gestures and things left deliberately unacknowledged, which was its own kind of communication once you learned to read it. Lily had learned to read it faster than either of them. By the 5th week after Denver, Lily had attached herself to Evelyn's mornings with the quiet determination of someone who has made a private decision and intends to see it through. She appeared in the kitchen every day before Cole was up, climbed onto the high stool near the counter, and watched Evelyn prepare breakfast with the focused, silent attention she usually reserved for things she was in the process of memorizing. Occasionally she asked questions. What's that for? Why do you cut it that way? Does it matter which direction? Evelyn answered each one as though it were a reasonable inquiry from a reasonable person, which it was, and which Lily clearly found satisfying. One morning Cole came into the kitchen earlier than usual, still in his work shirt and suspenders, and found Lily standing on a step stool beside Evelyn at the stove, holding a wooden spoon with the careful gravity of someone entrusted with something important. Slower, Evelyn was saying quietly. You're not stirring a fight. You're stirring porridge. Lily slowed the spoon, frowned at the pot. How do you know when it's right? It changes. Look, see how it's moving differently than it was a minute ago? It gets heavier. That's when. Lily stared at the pot with the intensity of someone watching for a very specific signal. Heavier, she repeated to herself, committing it. Cole stood in the doorway and did not announce himself and did not go back down the hall. He stood there until Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, and when their eyes met, she did not make anything of it, just turned back to the stove and said, without inflection, "Coffee's ready." He poured himself a cup and sat at the table, and the morning continued, ordinary and not ordinary at all. The attack, when it came, arrived on a Wednesday. Cole had ridden out early to the eastern pasture with Jasper and 2 of the hands to check on the fence line along the creek that something had been testing. Probably deer, but you checked because not checking was how you lost cattle. They were an hour's ride from the main house when Danny Pruitt appeared on the ridge above them, riding hard and wrong. The specific wrongness of someone who has left somewhere too fast to remember what posture is. Cole was already moving before Danny reached them. "The ranch," Danny said, pulling his horse up short and breathing like the animal under him. 3 men came in from the south road. They went straight for the office. Cole looked at Jasper. 1 second, then he was riding. He heard it before he saw it. Not gunfire, but voices raised and the sound of something heavy being moved or thrown. He came into the yard at a gallop and pulled up at the fence rail, and what he saw was this. 2 men he did not know standing in the open doorway of the ranch office, one of them holding a thick stack of papers that Cole recognized with a cold drop in his stomach as the documents they had collected. The third man was standing near the barn with his hand resting on his gun in the way that meant he was the one whose job it was to prevent interference. And Evelyn was standing between the office doorway and the 2 men, directly in their path, with both arms loose at her sides. She was not holding a weapon. She was just standing there. The man with the papers said something Cole couldn't hear at this distance. Evelyn said something back. The man's posture shifted. A certain kind of impatience, a certain kind of calculation about what it would cost to move a woman who was standing in a doorway. And Cole was off his horse and across the yard in the time it took for that calculation to finish. "Stop," he said. Not loudly. Loudly was for distance. He was close enough now that it didn't need to be loud. The man with the gun near the barn turned. Cole was already reading him. Right hand, gun on the right hip, weight shifted to the left, which meant he was right-handed and not comfortable, and about 2 seconds of escalation away from a decision he hadn't fully thought through. Jasper had come up on Cole's left flank, and the two other hands were behind him, and the arithmetic of the situation rearranged itself visibly in all three strangers' postures. "Those documents don't belong to you," Cole said. The man with the papers, older, narrow-faced, with the look of someone paid to do things rather than decide them, said, "We have authorization from Gerald Holt to retrieve materials pertaining to a legal matter." "You have a piece of paper," Holt wrote, and signed himself, Evelyn said from the doorway, still not moving. "Which is not authorization. That's a private note. You'd need a court order to remove anything from this property, and you don't have one, which means what you're holding is theft." The man looked at her with a kind of flat annoyance. "Ma'am, I'd suggest you step aside." "I'd suggest," Evelyn said, "that you put those papers back on the desk, get back on your horses, and tell Mr. Holt that if he sends men to this property again without a court order, Mr. Mercer will be filing a complaint with the federal marshal's office in Denver before the week is out." The narrow-faced man looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. He did not need to. He was standing with his hand near his gun and three men behind him and an expression on his face that communicated a complete absence of flexibility on the matter. The man with the papers set them on the desk inside the office. Not gently, but he set them down. The three strangers exchanged a look, mounted their horses, and rode back the way they had come, moving faster than they had arrived. Cole watched them until the dust settled. Then he turned to look at Evelyn. She had been completely still throughout, and she was still now. But something around her eyes told him that the stillness had been costing her something. Her hands, when she lowered them from the doorframe she had apparently gripped at some point, had marks on the palms. "Lily," he said first. "Inside. Back bedroom with the window shuttered." A pause. "She did exactly as I told her." Cole exhaled. He looked at the documents on the desk, then at the road. "Holt knows what we have." "He's known for at least a week," Evelyn said. "Someone told him, or he's connected enough to have found out another way." She rubbed her palm against her skirt absently, without seeming to notice she was doing it. "He's afraid of us. That means what we have is worth something, but it also means he's going to stop being patient." "I know." Cole looked at her. "You shouldn't have stood in that doorway." She looked back at him. "Someone had to. I mean, without a gun." "I don't have a gun." "Then we need to fix that," he said. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then she said, "All right," which was not the response he had expected, and which struck him later that evening as a small, significant thing, that she had heard the concern underneath the practicality and taken it for what it was, rather than arguing the point for the sake of her own independence. It was the kind of thing Clara would have done. He noticed that he was comparing them, and then he noticed himself noticing it, and neither observation was entirely comfortable, so he set them both aside and went to check on Lily. She was sitting on her bed with her knees drawn up and her chin on top of them, the shutters still closed. She looked up when he came in. "Are they gone?" she asked. "They're gone." She nodded slowly, processing. "Mama Evelyn told me to stay," she said. "She said to shut the window and don't open the door, and she'd knock 3 times when it was safe." Cole sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked at his daughter, this small, serious person who kept surprising him with how much she understood about things she shouldn't have had to understand yet. "She was right," he said. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She didn't leave." "What?" "When those men came." Lily looked at her hands in her lap. "She could have gone out the back. I heard Danny say she could have gone out the back and she didn't." She paused. "She stayed." Cole looked at the wall for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "She did." Lily unfolded herself from the bed and climbed into his lap, which she only still did when something had frightened her enough to temporarily set aside being 6 and old enough. He put his arm around her and she pressed her head against his chest, and they sat there in the shuttered room while the afternoon went quiet outside. "Papa," she said into his shirt. "Yeah, I think she's staying." He did not know if she meant today or something longer, and he did not ask. He just held on and let the question sit. 3 days after the men came for the documents, Cole rode southeast toward the settlement of Garnet Crossing to collect the last testimony they needed. A rancher named Frank DeLuca, who had lost 200 acres to Holt's Bank the previous year, and had, according to Tom Calloway, kept his original documents in a locked strongbox, rather than surrender them with the property. It was a 2-hour ride each way, and Cole had done it alone because Evelyn was needed at the ranch, and because it seemed straightforward, and because he had ridden that road 100 times. He never made it to Garnet Crossing. The ambush point was a narrow stretch where the road dropped between two rock faces before crossing a shallow creek bed, the kind of geography that makes men careless because it feels contained and familiar. Cole had his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun, and his mind was on the DeLuca documents and the timeline Finch had given them, and whether the shoulder was going to hold up through the fall work season, and he was 3 seconds too slow reading the two men positioned on the left-hand rock face. The shot came from above and behind. He registered the sound before the impact, a fraction of a second where time does that particular unfair thing it does in bad moments, stretching itself out so you understand completely what is happening and cannot do anything about it. Then the impact hit his left side, high, below the shoulder, and he was going sideways off the horse, and then he was in the creek bed, and the cold water hit him, and the pain hit him, and the light went complicated. Ridgeline, who had been trained for exactly nothing, bolted. Cole lay in 8 inches of cold creek water and took stock of himself, with the focused desperation of a man who knows that the next few minutes are the most important he has ever experienced. He could move his legs. That was the first thing he checked. He could move his arms, though the left one sent a message that arrived as white noise rather than specific information. He was bleeding. He could feel it even through the cold of the water, the particular warmth of it against his side. He pressed his right hand against the wound and applied pressure the way he had seen Evelyn apply pressure, and he lay still and listened. The two men on the rocks did not come down to finish it, which meant they were paid for a scare, not a kill, or they thought the creek had done the work for them, or they were watching from somewhere he couldn't see and waiting. He could not afford to assume the second and had no way to rule out the third. He stayed still for a long time, long enough that the cold water became a serious secondary problem. Then, carefully, he got to the bank. Getting up the bank took longer than he would have believed possible and cost him things he would not think about until later. He made it into the scrub oak above the creek line and got himself behind a rock that gave him sight lines in 2 directions, and he sat there with his hand on his wound and his back to stone and waited. The men did not come back. After an hour, or what felt like an hour, time being unreliable in his current condition, he started moving, not toward Garnet Crossing, toward home. 1 step at a time along the ridgeline, staying off the road, bleeding in a managed and deliberate way, talking to himself occasionally in a low voice because the sound of his own voice was keeping him from drifting. He was still moving when dark came, but moving slower, much slower. Ridgeline came back to the Double M at 4 in the afternoon without his rider. Evelyn was in the yard when the horse appeared on the road, and she knew before the animal reached the gate. She stood for 3 seconds, just 3, and then she was moving. She told Danny to get 2 men and follow the road south, torches after dark if necessary. She told Jasper to stay with Lily, non-negotiable, and Jasper was smart enough to see her face and not argue. She pulled the medical tin from her satchel, added items she had not needed yet, and hoped she would not need now, packed everything into the saddlebag with the systematic speed of someone who has stopped thinking and started executing. She rode south. She found him 2 hours after dark, on the east side of the ridge road, sitting against a rock with his hand on his side and his hat on the ground beside him. The torchlight found his face, and he looked up and squinted against it and said, with what she would later describe to no one as remarkable under the circumstances, "Took you a while." "You're an ID fool," she said, which was not what she had planned to say. She was already off the horse, already kneeling beside him. "That's fair," he said. She moved his hand from the wound and looked at it and then looked at his face. "Can you stand?" "I've been standing for the last 3 miles. "That's not what I asked." He stood. It took both of them. He was heavier than he looked and significantly less steady than his voice suggested, and for a moment on the way up, His full weight came against her, and she took it without stepping back, and they were very close in the dark, and neither of them had time to be awkward about it, because there wasn't time for anything except getting him onto the horse. The ride back was slow and longer than it should have been. She kept one hand on the reins and monitored him beside her with the peripheral awareness of a person who has decided that no one is allowed to fall off their horse tonight. He was quiet for most of it, which she did not take as a reassuring sign. Quiet in men who were shot was not the same as quiet in men who were fine. "The two men," she said after a while. "Could you identify them?" "No." A pause. "Holtz, I assumed." Another pause from her. "Did they get what they wanted?" "I didn't have the documents with me. I was going to collect them." He was silent for a moment. "I think they wanted me scared, or warned, or—" He paused, and she understood that the "or" at the end of that sentence contained several possibilities he was not yet ready to say aloud. She was. "Or removed," she said flatly. He was quiet. "He's escalating," she said. "He knows what we're building, and he can't stop it through the documents, so he's trying to stop it through you." She kept her eyes on the road ahead. "Which means what we have is enough. We need to get it to Finch before the end of the week." "Evelyn." Something in his voice made her turn. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the controlled, armored stillness he wore like a second skin, but something underneath it that had come through the wound or the cold or 3 miles of walking or all three together. Something unguarded and real, and probably not something he would have allowed in daylight. "I know you could leave," he said. "You've always known that. You have money enough. You have the legal knowledge to clear your own debts without me now." He paused, and the pain in his voice was not entirely from the wound. "You don't have to stay for this part." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment, the torch in her hand casting moving light across both of them. "I know," she said. She turned back to the road and kept riding. He did not ask what she meant. He understood what she meant, and the understanding of it sat between them for the rest of the ride home, warm and complicated, and neither of them willing to look at it directly yet, but there. Undeniably there, the way some things become undeniable once they have been said aloud, even in the briefest possible way. She operated on him at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. while a spring storm knocked itself against the house. Danny held the lamp. Jasper stood by the door with his arms crossed and his face arranged into an expression of deliberate calm that cost him considerably. Lily was asleep, or was supposed to be. Cole found out later she had been sitting on the hallway floor outside the kitchen door the entire time, too frightened to stay in her room and too obedient to come in. Evelyn did not shake. Cole watched her face while she worked because it was the only place in the room worth watching, and what he saw in it was a kind of fierce, channeled focus that had no room in it for anything except the task. She had done harder things than this. He did not know yet what all of them were, but he could see the history of them in the economy of her movements. Nothing wasted, nothing theatrical, just competence applied with everything she had. "This is going to be worse before it's better," she said, which he appreciated for being true. "I know." "Don't move." "I'm not moving." "You're about to." She was right. Afterward, when it was done and the wound was closed and dressed and the storm was beginning to tire itself out against the windows, she sat back in her chair and for just a moment, before she put the controlled composure back on, before she became the woman who did not show things, she looked exhausted and frightened and relieved in a combination so human and unguarded that Cole felt something in his chest move toward her without his permission. He was half delirious from blood loss and pain and the effort of not making a sound for the last 40 minutes. He did not trust the clarity of anything he was feeling, but he was also lying on a kitchen table at 2 a.m. because a woman who owed him nothing had ridden into the dark to find him, and that was not nothing, and he had stopped pretending it was nothing somewhere in the middle of a mountain road with her hand on the reins beside him. "Evelyn," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said, and this time it did not come out stiff. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she stood up and began cleaning the instruments and said, in a voice that was very carefully ordinary, "You're going to need 2 weeks of rest that you will not take, which means we need to solve the Holt situation before you're fully back on your feet." "Agreed," he said. "I'll write to Finch tomorrow." "Agreed." She glanced at him once more, sideways, as she was turning away. And then she went to check the hallway and found Lily there on the floor, asleep against the wall with her knees tucked up. and she stood over the child for a moment before picking her up the way you pick up a sleeping child, carefully, the way you'd carry something breakable and irreplaceable, and carrying her back to her room. Cole heard her footsteps go down the hall. He heard Lily's door close softly. He stared at the ceiling of his kitchen while the storm gave one last effort against the roof and then went quiet. Outside, the creek was running again. Real rain, finally, actual water in the banks. He lay there listening to it and thought about all the things he had been losing for 2 years, and the things that had, without his noticing, begun coming back. Cole spent the first 3 days of recovery doing exactly what Evelyn told him not to do, which was everything. She found him at the desk in the ranch office on the second morning, pale and sweating, bent over the supply ledger with a pen in his hand, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before saying, with the particular precision she reserved for moments when she wanted to be clearly heard, "If you tear those stitches, I will not be sympathetic." Cole looked up. "I'm sitting." "You're bleeding through the bandage, which I can see from here, which means you are not sitting quietly, you're straining." She crossed the room and he did not stop her when she checked the dressing, because the particular quality of her silence during those few seconds told him the situation was not as manageable as he had decided it was. "Lie down," she said. 2 hours. The ledger will survive without you. The Finch deadline. I'm handling the Finch correspondence. She set the bandaging materials on the desk with a controlled firmness that communicated the end of the discussion. "Lie down, Mr. Mercer." He looked at her. She looked back with the steady, level patience of a woman who had run out of diplomatic options and was now simply waiting for him to catch up with reality. He got up from the desk. He went to lie down. He did not like it, but he did it. What he did not know, lying in the front bedroom with the afternoon light coming through the curtains and the sound of Evelyn moving through the house, was what she was handling. He found out 3 days later when she came into the room with an envelope and set it on the bedside table with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way expressions are when they are covering something complicated. "This came from Boston," she said. He looked at the envelope. It bore a return address he did not recognize and a seal he did not know. Who sent it? Evelyn sat down in the chair beside the bed, the chair she had been sitting in, he realized, every evening since the surgery, when she came to check on him and sometimes stayed longer than checking required. Neither of them had commented on the staying. "It's from a firm in Boston that manages the estate of my maternal grandmother," she said. "She died in February. I didn't know." She paused. "We were not close. She did not approve of my father, and she made that clear throughout my childhood in ways that were—" She stopped, choosing. She was not a kind woman. But she was also consistent. Evelyn looked at the envelope rather than him. She had a particular distaste for my cousin William. She knew what he was, even when my father didn't. She excluded him from her estate entirely, which I also didn't know. Another pause, longer. She left the majority of it to me. Cole was quiet for a moment. "How much?" Evelyn told him. He stared at the ceiling. "That would cover the debt," he said slowly. "The full amount." 3 times over, she said. The room was very still. Outside, he could hear Lily in the yard talking to one of the barn cats in the serious, instructive tone she used with animals she was attempting to educate. The afternoon was warm. The creek was still running from the spring rain. Cole turned his head to look at Evelyn. She was still looking at the envelope. Her profile in the afternoon light was composed and unreadable in the way that, over the past 2 months, he had learned to recognize as the expression she wore when she was working out whether to say something true that might be unwelcome. "When did you find out?" he said. "The letter is dated 3 weeks ago. It was held at the post office." She met his eyes. "I found out this morning." He held her gaze. "Is there anything else you've known that you haven't told me?" It was a direct question, and he watched her take the full weight of it without flinching. "I had reasonable expectations of the inheritance," she said carefully. "Not certainty. My grandmother was unpredictable and had changed her will twice that I was aware of. I did not want to build a strategy around something that might not materialize." "But you knew it was possible." "I knew it was possible," she said it plainly, accepting the accountability in it. "I should have told you sooner. That's the second time I've had to say that to you, and I understand if it damages your trust in my judgment." Cole looked at the ceiling again. He thought about the night on the hotel floor in Denver. The cold road back through the mountains, the 3 miles of ridge he had walked with a wound in his side. He thought about the kitchen table at 2 in the morning and her hands not shaking. "It doesn't," he said finally. She was quiet. "But I want to be clear about something," he continued. He pushed himself up against the headboard, which pulled at the stitches in a way he ignored. "This money is yours. Your grandmother left it to you. It does not belong to the ranch, and it does not belong to me, and I am not going to use it to pay a debt that I should have been able to pay myself." Evelyn looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and something warmer that she was not yet naming. "That is one of the most impractical things you have said since I arrived here," she said. "And you have said several impractical things. It's your inheritance. And this is my home," she said. The words came out steady and unembellished, and she seemed slightly surprised by them herself, as though they had arrived ahead of her permission. She did not take them back. It stopped being a temporary arrangement somewhere between Denver and a kitchen table in the middle of a storm, Cole. "I don't know the exact moment, but I know it happened." She stood up from the chair. "We are going to use this money strategically, not to simply pay Holt. That resolves your debt and leaves him free to destroy the next family. We are going to use it to support the federal case, to compensate Finch properly, and if there is a legal mechanism to do so, to recover what the families he ruined have lost." She picked up the envelope. "That is how I want to use my grandmother's money. So if you're going to argue with me about it, do it now." Cole looked at her for a long moment. She had called him Cole again. She had said, "my home." She was standing in his bedroom in the late afternoon light, holding an envelope that could change the shape of everything, and she was angry and determined and asking him not to be a fool about it, and he was not going to be a fool about it. "No argument," he said. Something in her exhale told him she had been bracing for one. The letter to Finch went out the next morning. His response arrived 4 days later, and it was, for Aldous Finch, practically effusive. 3 full pages outlining a revised strategy that incorporated the new financial backing, the expanded testimony, and what he described as a considerably strengthened position against a target who has now demonstrated willingness to use physical violence, which federal prosecutors regard as clarifying. Within the week, 2 federal marshals arrived quietly in Silver Creek. Not loudly, not the way the novels would have it, with brass badges and pronouncements. They came in on a Tuesday on the afternoon stage, registered at the hotel under unremarkable names, and met privately with Cole and Evelyn at the ranch that evening. They were both lean, deliberate men who listened more than they spoke and asked questions that revealed, in their precision, exactly how much they already knew. They had been building their own case against Holt for 14 months. What Cole and Evelyn had gathered, the pattern of fraudulent clauses, the witness testimony, the documentation of the ambush, filled in the final sections of something that had been waiting for exactly this kind of corroboration. "The foreclosure proceeding," one of the marshals said, a quiet man named Reeves. "When is it scheduled?" "He's called it for Friday morning," Cole said. "Bank steps. 11 o'clock. Reeves looked at his partner. Something moved between them that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to satisfaction. "Then Friday morning works for us too," he said. After they left, Cole and Evelyn sat at the kitchen table in silence for a moment. It was a different silence than the ones they had shared in the early weeks. Less like 2 people maintaining distance and more like 2 people who had been through enough together that silence had stopped being a defensive posture and become something closer to rest. "It might not work," Cole said. "Not pessimism, just accuracy." "It might not," Evelyn agreed, "but we've done everything we could do." She turned her coffee cup in her hands. "Whatever happens Friday, we did that." Lily appeared in the doorway in her nightgown, squinting against the lamplight. "Are you 2 talking about the bad man again?" "Yes," Cole said. "Is it almost over?" Cole looked at Evelyn. "Almost," he said. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone who has been managing worry for weeks and is cautiously willing to begin setting some of it down. "Good," she said, "because I'm tired of Danny sleeping in the barn with a rifle." "So is Danny," Cole said. She went back to bed. Evelyn pressed her hand briefly over her mouth, and Cole recognized that she was covering a laugh, and he felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in a very long time. Friday morning came in cold and bright, the kind of Colorado fall morning that has no ambivalence in it. The sky a hard, flat blue, the mountains sharp-edged against it, the air clean in a way that makes everything feel slightly more real than usual. Cole, Evelyn, and Lily rode into Silver Creek together. This had not been discussed or decided in any explicit way. It had simply been understood. Lily sat in front of Cole on the saddle, upright and serious, wearing her good coat and the expression of someone who intends to witness something important. Evelyn rode beside them on the mare Jasper had saddled for her 3 months ago, and which had been hers ever since in every practical sense. Jasper and Danny rode behind them. Tom Calloway, who had heard about Friday from Cole earlier in the week, was already waiting on the main street when they arrived, standing with 2 other ranchers whose names Cole had added to the testimony. Silver Creek had assembled itself for the occasion with the communal instinct that small towns have for significant events. People stood on the wooden sidewalks and in the doorways of the shops with the particular stillness of an audience that is not yet sure what kind of production it is watching. Gerald Holt was standing at the top of the bank steps when they rode up. He was dressed in his best suit. He had brought 4 men with him, arranged behind him in a way that was meant to communicate power, and which, Cole thought, communicated something closer to nervousness. Holt's expression when he saw them approach was controlled and contemptuous. The expression of a man who has already written the ending and is merely waiting for the other people in the scene to accept their roles in it. "Cole," he said as they pulled up to the steps. His eyes moved to Evelyn, then to Lily, then back to Cole. "I see you decided to make a public occasion of this. That's your right." He spread his hands with practiced magnanimity. "I want you to know I take no pleasure in this proceeding." "I know you don't," Cole said, "because it's not going to go the way you planned." Holt's expression did not change. "The payment deadline passed yesterday at noon. You are in default. The foreclosure documents are prepared and witnessed." He looked at the small crowd on the street with the satisfaction of a man who has arranged things to his preference. "This is a legal proceeding, not a confrontation. I'd ask everyone to remain calm." "Mr. Holt," Evelyn's voice came out level and clear and carried in the cold air in a way that made people on the sidewalk straighten slightly. She reached into the bag across her saddle and withdrew a folded document that she held up. "This is a federal complaint filed 4 days ago in the United States District Court for the Territory of Colorado, alleging fraudulent lending practices, deliberate misrepresentation of loan terms, and extortion across 17 separate land transactions in 3 counties over the past 6 years." She paused. "Your name appears in it 63 times. The steps of the bank were very quiet. Holt stared at the document. Something moved across his face. Not fear exactly, but the first visible crack in the composure that had held through everything. "That document is authenticated, filed, and copied to the federal marshal's office." Evelyn's voice did not waver. "Which is why those 2 men standing near the livery stable have been waiting since this morning." Heads turned. On the far side of the street, Reeves and his partner moved away from the wall they had been leaning against and began walking toward the bank steps. They were not hurrying. They did not need to. Holt looked at his 4 men. He looked at Cole. He looked at Evelyn. And in that sequence of looks was a man rapidly recalculating and arriving at conclusions he had not anticipated and did not have a prepared response for. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said, and for the first time in Cole's experience, the pleasantness was completely gone from his voice. What was underneath it was cold and stripped and genuinely ugly. "People like you. You think you can walk into a federal court with the word of broke farmers and a woman who came here with nothing." "I came here with everything I needed," Evelyn said. As it turns out, Reeves climbed the bank steps. He removed his coat as he did so, showing the badge on his vest with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who has done this before and knows that the timing matters. "Gerald Holt," he said, "we have a warrant for your arrest on charges of federal fraud, extortion, and land theft. I'd ask you not to make this complicated." Holt went very still. Very. Then, in a move that surprised nobody who knew him and infuriated everyone anyway, he straightened his jacket, adjusted his cuffs, and said, loudly enough for the assembled street to hear, "This is a politically motivated attack on a legitimate businessman. I will have this dismissed within the week." "You're welcome to try," Reeves said pleasantly, and took him by the arm. The 4 men Holt had brought with him made a collective calculation that took about 3 seconds and resulted in none of them moving. Cole watched them make it without expression. Danny, behind him, exhaled. Holt was walked down the bank steps and across the street, and his voice grew louder as the distance from Dignity increased. Something about lawyers, something about contacts in the territorial government, something that became harder to follow as his composure left him entirely, and what remained was smaller and louder, and nothing like the man who had sat behind a polished desk and smiled at Cole across a leather folder. The crowd on the sidewalks watched him go in the particular silence that falls when a story that has been going one way for a long time suddenly changes direction. Tom Calloway took off his hat, put it back on, said to no one in particular, "Son of a bitch." Cole sat on his horse and watched until Holt disappeared into the marshal's custody and the street began to breathe again. He felt Lily's hand tighten on his arm. She had been perfectly still through the whole thing, watching with her wide, dark eyes, taking it in with the characteristic intensity she brought to things she intended to remember. "Is it done?" she asked. "The first part," Cole said. He looked at Evelyn. She had lowered the document and was holding it in her lap, and she was looking back at him with an expression that was tired and resolved and real in a way that had nothing to perform and nothing to protect and everything to feel. He thought about the altar in the church 2 months ago. Both of them frozen. Neither of them wanting to be there. The vows that felt like a closing door. He thought about what she had said 3 nights ago. It stopped being a temporary arrangement somewhere between Denver and a kitchen table in the middle of a storm. Tom Calloway clapped Cole on the shoulder as he rode past, saying something about drinks that Cole barely registered, because he was still looking at Evelyn and she was still looking at him. And the morning was moving around them with no awareness of what it was carrying. William Hart arrived on the afternoon stage 11 days later. Cole was in the barn when Jasper came to tell him, and he read the look on Jasper's face before the words. "Man from Boston at the front gate," Jasper said. "Dressed like money. Asking for Mrs. Mercer." Cole came out of the barn and looked at the gate. The man standing there was perhaps 40, lean, wearing a coat that belonged in a different climate, and an expression that belonged on a man who had not yet encountered anything he could not buy his way through. He had Evelyn's dark coloring, the family resemblance was visible, and none of her quality. Evelyn was already on the porch. Cole could not see her face from this angle, only her back, straight, still, the particular stillness he had learned to read as cost. She had known this was coming, she had told him it was coming. But knowing a thing and having it arrive at your gate in a good coat are different experiences, and the body responds to both. Cole walked across the yard and stood beside her on the porch without speaking. The message of standing there was the message. William Hart looked from Evelyn to Cole and made several rapid assessments, some of them correct and some of them not. "Evelyn," he said. His voice had the rounded, careful diction of a man who had spent considerable effort sounding educated. "You're a difficult woman to locate." "I didn't want to be located," she said. Nevertheless, he came through the gate without being invited. Cole noted this and said nothing yet. "I heard about your recent marriage. Congratulations seem premature given the circumstances. A frontier rancher, a debt arrangement." He smiled in a way that was designed to convey that he knew things other people didn't. "I know how Holt worked, Evelyn. I know what he used to put you here. You don't have to maintain the fiction with me." "It's not a fiction," she said. "Isn't it?" William's eyes moved to Cole with the deliberate assessment of someone trying to establish a hierarchy. "No offense intended to your husband. I'm sure he's a capable man for this particular environment." Cole said nothing. He had decided before William arrived that he would let Evelyn lead this as far as she wanted to lead it, and that he would be present in the way that mattered rather than the way that made noise. "I came because of the inheritance," William said, dropping the pleasantries along with the pretense that this was a social call. "Grandmother's estate. I've consulted with my own legal counsel, and there are grounds to contest the distribution. Her mental state in the final months was—" "Her mental state was perfectly sound," Evelyn said. "I have 3 letters from her physician dated in the last 6 months of her life attesting to that, as does the estate firm." She paused. "Aldous Finch, who is now my attorney, has also reviewed the estate documentation. He found it entirely airtight." William's smile became thinner. "Evelyn, you know that there are other matters, things from before you left Boston, information that, if it became publicly known in this town—" "Say it plainly," Cole said. William looked at him. "You came here to threaten her," Cole said. "Stop decorating it. Say what you mean to say." Something moved through William's face. A recalibration. And underneath it, the particular resentment of a man who is used to rooms where he is the most powerful person and has just recognized that this is not that room. He looked at Evelyn. There are things about your father's circumstances, the nature of the disgrace, the circumstances of the debts. If the people in this town knew, then they'd know, Evelyn said. William blinked. My father made mistakes, she said. He was deceived by people he trusted, and he was not strong enough to protect us from the consequences. That is a painful thing, and it is also just a thing that happened. It does not define me, and I stopped letting it shame me sometime between a mountain road and a kitchen table, and I am not particularly afraid of you telling people in Silver Creek what I could tell them myself. She stepped down from the porch, and she did it without hesitation, closing the distance between herself and William until she was looking at him at close range, and her voice, when she spoke, was very quiet and very final. You came here expecting to find the woman who ran from you in Boston. I understand that. But I'm not that woman anymore, and I would like you to look at me clearly for a moment and understand that before you say anything else. The yard was quiet. A crow moved off the barn roof. Somewhere down by the creek, one of the ranch hands was hammering something. William Hart looked at his cousin for a long moment. He looked at Cole, who was standing on the porch with both hands loose and an expression of complete unhurried attention. He looked at the ranch behind them, the mended fences, the recovered pastures, the evidence of a household in motion. He looked at Lily, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, and was regarding him with the direct, unimpressed assessment of a 6-year-old who has recently watched a much more frightening man taken away in handcuffs, and is not very concerned about this one. Something went out of William Hart then. Not entirely. Men like William rarely deflate completely. But enough. The calculation behind his eyes shifted from offense to retreat. The estate is yours, he said stiffly. I won't contest it. He adjusted his coat. I'll take the morning stage. He walked back through the gate. Nobody watched him go with particular interest. Cole came down from the porch. He stood beside Evelyn, and they both looked at the gate for a moment. She exhaled. A long, slow exhale, the kind that empties something that has been held for a very long time. Are you all right? He said. I will be. She paused. I am, mostly. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry, but the effort of keeping them that way was visible, which was its own kind of honesty. He was smaller than I remembered. Or I'm different. I don't know which. Both, probably, Cole said. She almost smiled. It was the kind of almost that was more than most people's fully. That evening, after Lily was in bed and the ranch was quiet, Cole walked out to the far edge of the property where a single granite marker sat beneath a cottonwood tree that was beginning to turn. Claire's grave. He had come here most evenings for 2 years. Not always with words, sometimes just with presence, because there are losses you do not recover from in the way that implies they stop mattering, only in the way that implies you learn to carry them forward. He stood there in the cooling evening and looked at the marker for a long time. I'm not replacing you, he said finally, quietly. I want to be clear about that. Nobody is replacing you. He paused. But she stayed, when she didn't have to, when she had every reason not to. He looked at the darkening sky above the cottonwood. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that except be honest about it. He stood there until the stars came out. Then he walked back toward the ranch house where the lamp was lit in the kitchen window, and Evelyn was visible through the glass moving around the room in the ordinary way of someone who lived there. And the light was warm, and the creek was running, and the cottonwood rustled once behind him as he went. He loved her. He had probably loved her for longer than he'd been willing to know. And that evening, walking back through the dark toward the lit window, he stopped pretending otherwise because he had run out of reasons to, and because some things, once you have seen them clearly, cannot be unseen. He did not tell her that night. He was not yet sure how to say it in a way that would sound like what it was, rather than what it wasn't. But he knew it now, held it steady in his chest where it had apparently been living for some time without his explicit endorsement. The lamp burned in the window. He went inside. He told her on a Sunday. Not because Sunday was special. It wasn't particularly just a morning in late October when the aspen trees along the creek had gone full gold and the first real cold had come in from the mountains. And Lily was at the Calloway place for the day because Martha Calloway had invited her for what Martha called a proper girls' afternoon, and what Lily called extremely boring but also I want to go. The ranch was quiet in the way it only was when Lily was somewhere else. A different quality of quiet, like a room with the furniture rearranged. Cole had been aware of it all morning. He had done the morning chores. He had checked the fence line on the north pasture. He had stood in the barn for about 10 minutes doing nothing in particular, and then he had gone inside and found Evelyn at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on and a letter from Finch spread out in front of her, and he had sat down across from her and said, without preamble, and without having fully planned the words, "I need to say something to you." She looked up over the glasses. Waited. He was quiet for a moment. He had rehearsed this loosely, in the way that men rehearse things they are afraid of. Incompletely. Avoiding the hard center of it, circling. Now that he was here, the rehearsed version felt dishonest, and he set it aside. "I know how this started," he said. "I know what it was at the beginning, and I know you know what it was." He looked at the table, then at her. "But I've been carrying something around for a while now, and I think you probably already know what it is, and I'm not doing either of us any favors by not saying it out loud." Evelyn set down the letter. She took off the reading glasses and folded them in her hands. She did not say anything, which was how he knew she understood what was coming and was giving him the room to arrive at it himself. "I love you," Cole said. "Not the arrangement, not the partnership, not what you've done for the ranch or for Lily, though all of that is real." He paused. "You. Whatever you are underneath all the capable, competent, steady as wire cable outside. Whatever that woman is that I have caught about 4 times looking out at the mountains when she thought no one was watching." He stopped. "I don't want you here because you're useful. I want you here because this is not a house I want to be in without you in it. And I should have said it before now, but I was..." He paused and said the true thing. "I was scared of it. I'm still a little scared of it." The kitchen was very still. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing something complicated that she was not trying to hide, which itself told him something significant, because she hid things by default, and choosing not to was a deliberate act. "I know," she said quietly. "Which part?" "All of it." She looked down at her hands, at the folded glasses. "I have been waiting for you to say it because I didn't want to say it first, and then find out I had misread the whole thing." She looked up. "I have been wrong about men before, significantly wrong, and I told myself that I was not going to..." She stopped and started again more simply. "I told myself I would wait until I was certain." "Are you certain?" She looked at him steadily. "I have been certain for longer than I intended to be." He reached across the table. Not dramatically, just put his hand out, open, on the table between them. She looked at it for a moment, and then she put her hand in his, and they sat like that in the quiet kitchen while the October light came through the window and the aspens moved outside in the wind, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed to be said right then. It was not a fairy tale moment. The table had a coffee ring on it that nobody had gotten around to scrubbing. Cole's shoulder ached in the cold the way it would probably always ache now. Evelyn had ink on 2 of her fingers from the morning's correspondence. They were both tired people who had been through hard things and were sitting in an ordinary kitchen on a Sunday and choosing, without ceremony or performance, to be honest about something real. That was enough. That was more than enough. The news about the pregnancy arrived in December, 6 weeks after that Sunday, announced by Evelyn in the same direct, undecorated way she announced most things. Sitting at the kitchen table after dinner, Lily already in bed, saying simply, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not react the way I think you might react." Cole set down his coffee cup. "How do you think I might react?" "With fear," she said, "which would be understandable, but which I also need you to manage, because I can't manage mine and yours simultaneously. And we are going to need to be clear-headed about this." He was quiet for a moment. He was doing the thing she had predicted. He felt it, the cold particular fear that had lived in him since Clara, since that summer in 1879. Evelyn watched him do it and did not look away and did not try to talk him out of it before he got through it. "Okay," he said finally. "Okay, you heard me, or okay, you're managing it?" "Both." He looked at her. Are you well?" "I'm well. I'm tired in ways I've read about and experience confirms, but I'm well." She paused. There is something else. She held his gaze. I believe it may be more than one. Cole stared at her. I cannot confirm it yet, she said carefully, but there are indications. The doctor in town will be able to tell us more by February. She said it with the measured tone of someone presenting information they have already spent considerable time processing alone, which he realized she had known for at least a week before telling him, had sat with it and turned it and made her own peace with it enough to deliver it calmly. He felt something about that, a complicated mixture of gratitude and a small ache that she'd had to carry it alone even that long. More than one, he said. It's a possibility. How are you feeling about that? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with honesty that was so unguarded it almost hurt to watch, terrified. And also, she stopped, shook her head slightly. I grew up as an only child in a house with one parent who was increasingly unwell and one cousin who was a predator. I spent 28 years being alone in rooms full of people. She met his eyes. I find that I am also, underneath the terror, not entirely displeased. Cole got up from his chair and crossed to her, and she stood up to meet him, and he held her in the way you hold someone when you have run out of words, and that is not a lack but a sufficiency. Both arms, fully, the way you hold on to things you are not willing to lose. She let him. She held back just as hard. We're going to be all right, he said into her hair. He did not know if it was true. He knew it was what he intended. We're going to try, she said, which was more honest and probably wiser. They told Lily on a Saturday morning. Cole had thought about how to do this carefully, which meant he overthought it and said it badly, which Evelyn had predicted, and Lily resolved immediately by cutting through his careful phrasing with the efficiency of a child who is already following the shape of a conversation toward its conclusion. Are there babies coming? Lily asked. Yes, Cole said. How many? Possibly 2. Lily went very still. Her expression moved through several things rapidly. Surprise, calculation, something that looked briefly like alarm, and then a very specific kind of consideration that Cole recognized as her determining whether this development was something that had been done to her or something she could participate in. 2 babies would be a lot of noise, she said finally. Yes, Evelyn agreed. They would. Would they share a room? Probably, at first. Lily thought about this. I'm not sharing my room. Nobody is asking you to, Cole said. Another pause. Can I be in charge of them sometimes? Within reason, Evelyn said. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing the revised shape of her future. Then she looked at Evelyn with the direct, dark-eyed gaze she had inherited from Cole and said, Are you scared? Evelyn looked at the girl for a moment. She had a choice here, the reassuring answer, the adult answer that protected children from reality. She chose differently. A little, she said. But I've been scared before, and I've been all right. Lily seemed to find this acceptable. I'll help, she said, with the serious authority of someone assuming a position of responsibility. I'm good at helping. I know you are, Evelyn said. Lily got down from the table and went to find the barn cat, which was her usual method of processing significant information, and Cole and Evelyn sat in the kitchen in the particular warm silence of people who have just discovered that their household, difficult and imperfect and built from pieces that weren't designed to fit together, has turned into something that works. The winter was long and Evelyn's pregnancy was not easy. Cole had feared this, and she had told him not to borrow trouble before it arrived. And then the trouble arrived anyway, in the form of weeks of genuine illness in the early months, a brutal cold that settled in her chest in January and took 3 weeks to fully leave, and the kind of exhaustion that goes past tired into something that has no polite name. She did not complain. This was both admirable and, to Cole, occasionally maddening, because a woman who does not complain when she is struggling is also a woman who makes it difficult to help her. Tell me when things are worse, he said to her one evening in February, after he had found her sitting on the kitchen floor. Not fallen, just sitting, too tired to make it to the chair, and apparently deciding the floor was a reasonable alternative. Things are fine, she said from the floor. You're on the floor. The floor is quite solid. I appreciate that about it. He sat down beside her on the floor. She looked at him. He looked back. After a moment, she leaned her head against his shoulder and he put his arm around her and they sat on the kitchen floor in February while the wind moved outside and the lamp burned low. "I'm tired," she admitted. Just that. No decoration. "I know," he said. "I know you are." He sat there with her until she was ready to get up. She did not thank him specifically, and he did not make anything of it because they had moved past the economy of gratitude into something more habitual and more real. The thing where you show up for someone not as a transaction, but as a fact, and they receive it the same way. Lily, for her part, had taken her self-appointed role with a dedication that occasionally required gentle redirection. She had informed her teacher at the schoolhouse that she would be needed at home for important family reasons starting in April, which Cole and Evelyn had to quietly reverse. She had reorganized the small bedroom at the end of the hall according to her own specifications, which were thorough and idiosyncratic and mostly functional. She had also, quietly and without anyone asking her to, moved Clara's photograph from the mantelpiece to the small shelf in her own room, where she kept it beside her mother's hairbrush. Not hiding it, not erasing it, just carrying it with her in a way that belonged to her specifically. Cole noticed. He did not say anything to Lily. He said something to Evelyn instead, one evening describing what he'd seen, and Evelyn was quiet for a moment and then said, "She's figuring out how to hold both things at once." A pause. "That's actually very hard for adults. She's doing it at 6. 7, Cole said. She turned 7 in March. 7. Evelyn looked at nothing in particular. "She's going to be remarkable." "She already is," Cole said. And he meant both of them. The twins arrived on an April night when a spring storm came off the mountains and hit the valley like it had an argument to settle. The doctor from town, a solid, unexcitable man named Hartwell, who had delivered approximately 200 babies in his career and regarded most obstetric crises with the calm of someone who has seen the category before, had been called out to the ranch at 8 in the evening when Evelyn's labor began in earnest. By 10, the storm had knocked out the road in 2 places with fallen trees, and Hartwell was at the ranch until it was over, regardless of preference. Cole was not present in the room. This was the arrangement, the standard of the time, the practical reality. He sat in the kitchen with Jasper, who had come from the bunkhouse because the bunkhouse felt too far away, and Danny, who had come because Jasper had come, and Lily, who was supposed to be asleep and wasn't. The lamp burned. The storm hit the walls. Nobody spoke much. Lily sat in her nightgown with her knees drawn up on the kitchen chair and her eyes very open, listening. Every time a sound came from the back of the house, Cole's hands tightened on the coffee cup. He was not managing the fear as well as he wanted to. This was honest. It was the fear that had lived in him since 1879, the specific, irreversible lesson that labor could take people, that it had taken Clara quickly and without warning, that no amount of preparedness or love or willingness to trade places made a person safe from the flat, terrible arithmetic of it. Evelyn was not Clara. He knew this. They were different people in different circumstances, with a different doctor and different knowledge. He knew all of this, and it helped somewhat, and not entirely. At one point, Lily got down from her chair and came and stood beside him and put her small hand on his arm. She didn't say anything. He looked down at her. She looked up with her mother's eyes, Clara's eyes. And then she leaned against his arm, and they stayed like that, both of them frightened, neither of them pretending otherwise, which was its own kind of comfort because it was real. At 2 in the morning, Hartwell appeared in the kitchen doorway. "2 healthy babies," he said. His voice was flat and professional and contained underneath that professionalism the quiet satisfaction of a man who has been doing his job for 30 years and still finds it worth doing. "Boy and a girl. Your wife," he looked at Cole directly, "is exhausted and will need considerable rest. But she came through it well. She's strong." Cole put down the coffee cup. He realized his hands were shaking slightly and did not try to hide it from Jasper or Danny or Lily, because there are moments when hiding things costs more than it's worth. "Can I see her?" he said. "Give it a few minutes. Let the nurse finish up." Hartwell accepted the cup of coffee Danny pressed on him. "Your wife, by the way, had opinions throughout the entire process," he added, with the tone of a man reporting a weather observation. "Considerable opinions, expressed clearly." "That sounds right," Cole said. He waited the few minutes. They were the longest few minutes he could recall. Then he walked down the hall and pushed the door open. Evelyn was in the bed, pale and wrecked and more tired than he had ever seen her, which was significant because he had seen her after the Denver blizzard and after the night she pulled a bullet out of him in a storm and after weeks of frontier travel and illness. This was different, a particular quality of emptied out and filled up simultaneously that he had no better words for. She had a bundle in each arm. The lamp on the bedside table was low and warm. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes were wet, which was the first time he had seen her cry. Genuinely, uncontrolled, in 5 months of living beside her. He sat on the edge of the bed and she turned one of the bundles toward him, and he took it, clumsy and careful at once the way a man is when he is holding something new and fragile and permanent. The baby was very small and very red and had a quantity of dark hair that seemed ambitious for someone approximately 40 minutes old. He opened his eyes briefly, registered the existence of Cole with an expression of profound indifference, and closed them again. "Samuel," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice was rough. "If you still agree to that." "Samuel," Cole confirmed. He looked at the other bundle in her arms. "And her?" "Rose," she said. "I've been calling her Rose in my head for 2 months. I didn't tell you in case things—" She stopped. "Rose," Cole said. "Both of them are perfect." "They're not," she said honestly. "They're very loud, and Samuel has a facial expression I find concerning, and Rose arrived 3 minutes after her brother, which I believe is already establishing a personality trait." She was crying and almost laughing at the same time, the specific emotional compound of someone who has been through something enormous and has not yet had time to organize their feelings into manageable categories. Cole leaned forward and kissed her forehead, which was the first time he had done that. She closed her eyes. "I'm here," he said. It was the simplest thing he could say and also the most complete. "I know," she said. "I know you are." The door opened a crack and Lily's face appeared at the edge of it, nightgown and bare feet, and absolutely incandescent with the effort of having waited this long. "Can I—" she started. "Come in, Bug," Cole said. She came in carefully, the way you move when you have decided to be very responsible about something. She climbed onto the foot of the bed and looked at the 2 bundles with huge eyes. She reached out one finger and touched Samuel's cheek, very gently, with the focus of someone performing a delicate and important task. Samuel did not react. Rose made a small sound. "They're very small," Lily said. "They'll get bigger," Evelyn said. "They look like—" Lily paused, examining them. "They look like they're still deciding what they are." "That's a reasonable description," Cole said. Lily sat back on the foot of the bed and drew her knees up in the characteristic posture and looked at her family. The complete, improbable, unplanned shape of it, with the expression of someone arriving at a conclusion she intends to keep. "I'm going to teach them everything," she said. "Everything?" Evelyn said. "About the plants and the animals, and how the biscuits work, and—" She paused, added with 7-year-old gravity, "I'll teach them which of Papa's moods mean to leave him alone." Cole looked at Evelyn. Evelyn looked at Cole. Something passed between them that was too large and too layered to be reduced to a single word, though if it had a word, it would have been something like this, as in, "This is it, this is the thing, this imperfect and exhausted and laughing through tears thing, sitting in a room during a storm in April." The storm passed by morning. The road cleared. Silver Creek woke up to April sun and mud, and the particular aliveness that comes after hard weather. Word traveled the way word always did, fast and thorough. By afternoon, Tom Calloway had ridden over with a jar of Martha's honey and the news that half the county knew. By evening, there were 3 more visitors, all of them bearing practical things rather than ceremonial ones: food, firewood, a cradle from the Calloway barn that Martha had kept from when her own children were small. Cole stood on the porch, watching the road and thinking about things the way you do after a long fight finally ends and the quiet arrives, and you don't quite know what to do with your hands yet. The federal proceedings against Gerald Holt had continued through the winter. Finch had written in March with the outcome: guilty on 11 counts, federal sentencing that would take him well past any horizon that mattered to the people of Silver Creek, his assets seized for partial restitution to the families he had defrauded. It was not everything. The Crane widow could not get her husband back. The years of fear and loss that the other families had lived through could not be simply returned, but several of them had received partial restitution of their land or its equivalent value, and the bank had been placed under federal administration, and the system that Holt had built over 6 years had been taken apart, piece by piece, in a Denver courtroom with Evelyn's documentation at the center of it. She had not been able to attend the verdict. She had been 8 months pregnant and sensible enough to know it. Cole had gone and come back and told her in the kitchen that evening, straight and plain, and she had nodded once and been quiet for a while and then said, "Good," and gone back to the letter she was writing, and that was the whole of it. No celebration, no vindication speech, just the quiet satisfaction of a thing being set right after a long time being wrong. Standing on the porch now, Cole thought about the morning in Holt's bank. The leather folder, the teeth smile, the particular humiliation of being told that your land and your future belong to someone else's appetite. He thought about the church, the frozen vows, the ride back with Lily between them on the wagon seat. He thought about all the moments between there and here, the bad ones and the ones that surprised him, and the ones he would keep until there was nothing left of him to keep them. He had not chosen any of this. Neither had she. That was the thing he had come to understand, slowly and resistantly and finally completely, that the most important things in his life had arrived not from plans or intentions, but from circumstances that felt at the time like walls closing in, and had turned out to be doors. He was not a philosophical man by nature, and he knew that what he'd just thought was the kind of thing that sounded simple, and was not simple at all when you were living inside it. When the banker is smiling at you across the desk, when the 6-year-old is crying into your shirt, when the woman standing in the doorway is a stranger, and you have just promised to spend your life with her, and you are both trapped and both too proud to show it and too scared to look directly at what you are actually afraid of. The truth was that love, the kind that lasted and cost something and changed you in ways that required your full cooperation, that kind of love did not arrive complete and certain. It arrived as a stranger on a wagon seat, as a steady hand in a medical crisis, as a voice in a hotel room in the dark, as a woman standing in a doorway that men wanted her to leave. It arrived in pieces, ordinary and improbable, and you built it the same way you built everything else worth having. Imperfectly, over time, without the guarantee of a good outcome, choosing to continue on the days when continuing was difficult. He understood that now in his bones rather than just his head. He heard the screen door behind him, and Evelyn came out onto the porch, moving carefully, still sore, wrapped in the heavy shawl that had been Martha Calloway's contribution to the afternoon's arrivals. She stood beside him and looked at the road and the mountains beyond it and the last of the April sun going down over the ridge. "Lily has named the barn cat Samuel," she said. Cole closed his eyes briefly. "Of course she has. She says it's to give the baby cat a role model." A pause. "I didn't have the energy to address the logic. We'll address it tomorrow." They stood together on the porch in the cooling evening, not talking much, not needing to. "Cole," she said after a while. "I know this isn't what either of us expected," she said quietly. "Any of it. The beginning was—" She paused. "The beginning was not the beginning I would have chosen." "No," he agreed. "But I'm—" She stopped, and he could hear her working on the sentence, choosing the right words with the care she always brought to things that mattered. "I'm glad I stayed. I'm glad we did this the hard way, because I don't think we would have gotten here any other way." She glanced at him sideways. "We are not easy people." "No," Cole said. "We are absolutely not." She leaned against him, the way she had begun doing in recent months, without asking, without announcing, just as a fact of how they stood together now. He put his arm around her, and they looked out at the mountains going purple in the evening light, and the creek catching the last of the sun, and the double M ranch that his father had built, and he had nearly lost, and had somehow, through disaster and stubbornness, and a woman who refused to leave, managed to keep. The lamp came on in the kitchen behind them. Inside the house, Samuel and Rose were asleep in the cradle Lily had positioned with architectural precision in the front room. Lily herself was asleep in her own room with Clara's photograph on the shelf and her boots on the floor in exactly the way Cole had asked her not to leave them. It was not a perfect life. The shoulder would always ache in cold weather. The bills were manageable, but not finished. There would be hard winters ahead, and calves lost, and fences down, and all the ordinary machinery of difficulty that does not stop arriving simply because you have survived the extraordinary kind. Evelyn would have days when the old fears resurfaced, and Cole would have days when grief did what grief does and came back without warning to remind him of what it wanted. Lily would grow up and get complicated in the ways that children become complicated, and Samuel and Rose would become people with their own sharp edges and their own needs, and their own versions of the stubbornness that ran through this family like iron ore through rock. None of that was a mistake. None of it was the cost of something good. It was the substance of being alive, fully and without shelter, and doing it alongside people who had chosen, again and again, in small moments and large ones, to stay. In Silver Creek, people still talked about the foreclosure that didn't happen, the banker in federal prison, the rancher and the school teacher who built something out of nothing and spite and circumstance. They told the story the way towns tell stories that mean something to them, with embellishments and varying accuracy, and the particular affection that communities feel for evidence that people can be more than the worst thing that happened to them. But the real story, the one that mattered, was smaller and less dramatic than the town's version. It was the kitchen floor in February, the hand across the table on a Sunday morning, a 7-year-old girl on the foot of a bed deciding she was going to teach 2 new people everything she knew, a man walking back across a dark yard toward a lit window, and understanding finally that what he was walking toward was not a compromise or a consolation prize or a practical arrangement that had accidentally become something else. It was a choice, made imperfectly, under duress, without full information, by 2 flawed and frightened people who had run out of easier options, and then made again. Every morning, in all the ordinary ways that people choose each other, showing up, staying, saying the hard true thing, walking into the dark when the horse comes home alone. That was all it was. That was everything it was. End.